Industrial Hemp Advisory Board as part of the California Department of Food and Agriculture. The meeting will be called to order today at exactly 9:36 p.m. I'd like to welcome the board members, the audience in the room, and of course the audience at home who are watching via the live stream.
So meetings of the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board are open to the public and comply with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. This act allows the public to comment on all agenda items. Yes. Audience members may address the board. Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me? Okay, thank you. Well, I'll start all over. So meetings of the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board are open to the public and comply with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. This act allows for the public to comment on all agenda items. Audience members may address the board following each agenda item using the podium. All speakers from the audience are limited to 3 minutes. Are there any members of the audience that require accommodation in order to participate in this meeting today? Okay.
All right, we do have a sign-in sheet in the back over there. We request that all attendees sign in. It is not mandatory for attendees to sign in to participate in a public meeting. It simply helps with the minutes and communications to interested parties. Roll call by me for the board members and a quick self-introduction. I'll begin. My name is Lawrence Serpin. I am the president and owner of Hemp Traders, and I am a member of the the Hemp Industries Association.
Matt McLean with Buenaventura Coast and the World Cannabis Foundation.
Rick Garola, Shasta County Agricultural Commissioner.
Van Butzik, UC Cooperative Extension and UC Berkeley.
John Rulak, founder of Nativa and Re-Botanicals, and also on the board of California Hemp Council.
Joshua Chase with Kumbaya Farms.
Tom Pierce, General Manager, West Island Cotton Growers, a farmer-owned cooperative, San Joaquin Valley, and a farmer.
Joshua Kress, I'm the Chief of the Pest Exclusion Branch for CDFA.
Richard Soria, retired horticulture instructor and pest control advisor.
David Robinson, Kings County Sheriff, representing the California State Sheriff's Association.
Michelle Phillips with the CDFA Industrial Hemp Program.
All right, thank you everyone for attending. We actually do have a new board member, John Currier, but I don't see him here yet. So if he shows up a little later, we'll welcome him at that time. Each board member should have a personalized folder with handouts. Copies of the agenda are available for audience members. All handouts will be brought up on the screen, and copies can be provided after the meeting upon request. All right. On the handouts that you have, we need to briefly review the agenda and request any corrections or changes to the order. Today, our topics of the meeting will be, of course, review and approve the minutes from the September 26, 2018 meeting and the October 30th, 2019 meeting and December 12th, 2019 board meetings. There is a typo on the meeting dates. It should be 2018, not 2019. Another item is we're going to have a brief update on federal status and proposed state legislation for industrial hemp. The next agenda item will be industrial hemp pesticide requirements. The next item will be industrial hemp and fertilizing materials labeling requirements. The next item will be industrial hemp seed certification update. The next item will be an update on industrial hemp registration, and then that will be followed by an update on the industrial hemp program, the revenue, and the budget. Board member list is also posted to our website, and we would ask any board members to check the websites and if they need any corrections needed on their information. And the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act governs the meeting and actions of state boards, such as the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board, including requirements for public notices, access, and comments. AB 2958 amended the act to address public meetings held by teleconferences. Changes took place effect on January 1st, 2019.
So for the board members, there's a copy of that Bagley-Keene in your handout. To go over some general housekeeping notes before we get started, restrooms are located on the outside of this auditorium on the left. The men's bathroom is the first two doors on the right, and the women's restrooms are located down the hall and up the stairs, or down the hall and around the corner on the right. Water bottles are available in the back of the auditorium. Please let us know if we run out. And in case of an emergency, please exit out of the auditorium and go outside through the front of the building and head across to the park.
Before I continue, our new board member, John Courier, has just arrived. If you would just tap your microphone to turn it on and just give a very 1 or 2 sentence introduction of who you are.
Sure. John Courier, Badlands Provisions. I'm a farmer grower in Brawley, California, Imperial Valley.
Thank you, John. All right, and we do have a quick note on public comments. We will have the opportunity for public comments throughout the meeting, as well as an opportunity for general comments at the end. For comments during an agenda item or pending board motion, please keep comments pertinent to the item in motion, and we do stress that. If you're going to comment on what we're actually talking about at that moment. At the end of the meeting, we will have an opportunity for additional comments, both related to the meeting and for items that are not on the agenda. We request all individuals who would like to comment on an agenda item to come up to the podium to use the microphone. We also request for each speaker to state their name and affiliation before commenting. Due to the large number of attendees, we will be limiting all commenters to 3 minutes unless there are follow-up questions from the board. We will be timing all commenters and will try to provide warnings prior to the time limit ending. Thank you for your consideration as we try to provide everyone with an opportunity to comment during the proceedings. If you have additional questions for the CDFA regarding industrial hemp and the industrial hemp program, please direct your questions to the CDFA staff. You may contact them by emailing industrialhemp@cdfa.ca.gov or calling 916-654-0435. All right, the first item on the agenda is actually to review and approve the minutes from the September 26th, October 30th, and December 12th, 2018 board meetings. A copy of the minutes of September 26th, 2018 minutes were sent out to board members by email prior to the meeting, but the minutes from the October 30th and December 12th, 2018 meeting are currently being finalized and are not available yet. So at this time, I would like to ask the board members here, have you had an opportunity to review the minutes from the September 26th meeting? Okay, does anyone need a moment to review it in the handout? No? Okay. Would anyone like to make any changes or corrections to the meetings as they were presented? All right, nope. Okay, I make a motion to accept the minutes for the September 26, 2018 as presented. Does anyone second the motion? Okay. All right. Do we need any further discussion before we vote?
Just a note, so Van, you're seconding. Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone want to have any further discussion on the notes? Does anyone in the audience would like to make a public comment on the notes from the September 26th meeting? Nope. All right, so let's have a vote. All in favor to accept the minutes, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. All right, and does anyone abstain from voting? Okay, thank you, David. And you got that logged, Michelle? All right, so the motion is approved. Oh, all right. We request approval to post draft minutes for the October 30th and December 12th meetings once available.
So I can explain. So we're still finalizing the minutes for the last two meetings. It's going through some further review and approval. So we would like to have the board's approval to post the draft minutes for the public viewing prior to the next time we meet. So if that's acceptable to the board, we'll go ahead and do that. If anyone object to that, please let me know.
All right, do we need to vote? Or no, okay. All right, our next item agenda is a brief update on federal status and proposed state legislation for industrial hemp. This will be provided by Patrick Goggin of the Holtman Law Group and the California Hemp Council. We should have, board members should have a handout of Senate Bill 153 and Assembly Bill 228.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Patrick Goggin, on behalf of the California Hemp Council, Vote Hemp, and Hoban Law Group. I just, I have an outline here that I just prepared last night. Is there a way to get it up onto the? I do not. Okay, so what I'll do afterwards is I'll send it over so that it can be dispersed to the public. I just want to preface my comments on the fact that I have just returned from Indonesia, so I'm a little jet lagged and somewhere in the Pacific as far as my time zone, and doing my best to adjust to this one. So bear with me. I'm going to try to keep it brief, as you indicated. It is a brief update. If you guys have questions at any time, just holler and I'll stop and we can discuss it. So as far as a federal status update, we know that the Farm Bill passed December 20th of last year. It was a game changer. We are now, we are out of redefining things and in the space of implementation at the federal level. USDA has indicated, they initially had indicated that they would be coming out with regulations following up on the Farm Bill, and in terms of implementing and guiding states on state plans, we anticipated that we would get that update and the regulations themselves this month. However, it's not occurred yet, and there's some question as to when exactly we will get it. It's my understanding that the regulations are being reviewed by the OMB in DC, and that they could come as soon as September and as late as November. So we will see how that goes. But they'll really be providing guidance to states on their state plans. And there are a few things that I really think that we should be looking out for, in particular regarding testing and specifically in the inclusion of THCA in testing, post-decarboxylation, and other similarly reliable methods. We look at that because we think that testing is going to be one of the biggest issues as we see issues cropping up with transportation. It's required that states allow for the transportation of hemp through their states, even if they don't allow for the production. And there have been some cases where seizures have occurred and questions have occurred in regards to the THC content. So look for some clarification on that.
Hey, Patrick. I just wanted to give an update a little from what I heard at the American Herbal Products Association CBD meeting. It was,
Thank you.
I think it was last week, and a representative from USDA was there, And like you're saying about the testing as an issue, he stated at this CBD roundtable update was that the setting the national standards for CBD testing is turning out to be very hard for them, and that they haven't been able to, that's the issue.
CBD or THC?
CBD, or just the testing protocol, whether it's THC or CBD, I think, but probably more like with the THC. But the testing protocol, they're having a hard time with that, and I think that's going to delay things. And also, I would just say, as someone who's in the hemp CBD business, you can take the same lot, same flower, package it, and send it to 2 laboratories. You get different results. Same product. I think we just need to understand that's what our industry is facing. It's not consistent, whether it's testing for CBD or THC. So, anyways, it sounds like there's going to be some delays, and we don't know how long, because if they can't get the protocol for testing, then they're not able to fulfill their obligation under the law. So may need to be some things just to look at there. I just wanted to share that. That was the latest from last week from the USDA.
So, my point exactly is that this is an issue. The state in California has worked to put in regulations to have a really, I think, progressive protocol and a homogenized sampling protocol. But the issue, in large part, ends up arising when law enforcement just takes the flowering tops without the stems and the other parts of the plant, which will necessarily increase the THC content. So this is one of the principal issues that we're going to be facing as an industry moving forward. And we all need to be working together on it to come up with solutions, and with at the federal level as well. A couple of other updates. FDA, I'll go to kind of the bottom of this part of the update. We're waiting. FDA held hearings, public comment, both orally, and they've received comments in writing. They had a hearing at the end of May, public hearing. Received comments there. They held comment period open till some point in July. In fact, the Kentucky Department of Agriculture submitted comments, and the FDA has already responded to those comments. I don't have a lot of details on that at the moment, but we are waiting for FDA to really get its act in gear in terms of addressing these issues. We've got a significant part of the economy that is continuing to expand, and they're leaving it to the states to come up with solutions. And we'll get to in a minute what California is doing, but we need federal guidance on this, and they got to stop dragging their feet, and we're working on that. Congress is putting their feet to the fire, and we should have an update from them on the status of their development of regs and the pathway for CBD-rich products, hemp CBD-rich products, in the natural product space as a food and dietary supplement sometime this fall. Hopefully, what I'm hearing is October. So the jury's out on what exactly they're going to do, but they know that there is a mandate by Congress to allow for these products outside of FDA-approved drugs. That's unacceptable. The people have spoken, and that is what we're engaged in. It's just the challenge of waiting for the federal government and its agencies to get their act in gear and stop using it's difficult as an excuse. We know it's difficult. We've been working on this issue for decades. We're working to change the law, and now they got to do their job. So we're putting their feet to the fire, and hopefully we'll have some further indication that we don't have to wait 2 to 3 years to get this done. A couple of other, there's been a piece of legislation introduced. It's called the Hemp for Victory Act, and it's a stellar piece of legislation that, if passed, would provide grants for research to land-grant universities and colleges, and requires for the Department of Agriculture to submit reports issues including the economic impacts, potential economic impacts of hemp, a report on the agricultural chemicals that are being found and discovered in consumable hemp products. It calls upon the Small Business Administration to provide support to fledgling hemp companies. It provides for looking at hemp materials in the Department of Defense. I mean, they are calling it the Hemp for Victory Act, and they're doing it for a reason. They're looking to include hemp materials in housing and building, and they're also calling upon the VA to look into hemp as a potential source of medicine and relief and therapy for our vets.
Patrick, is that a Senate bill or a representative
It's a House bill.
House bill, and who's the one who's introduced it?
I think it's Gibbard, if I recall correct. Gabbard.
Oh, Tulsi. Okay, very good. Out of Hawaii.
Yeah, Hawaii's got its own issues, and so I mean, as we know, Hawaii just actually, the governor vetoed a bill for no apparent reason other than to somehow appease law enforcement, and they are really coming down on CBD products. So Hawaii really needs. It's great that Gabbard's leading the charge at the federal level, but they need to do something at the state level. There was a hearing on hemp in the Senate Ag Committee in July on hemp production, and the Senate Banking Committee held a hearing on cannabis and hemp banking. So make no mistake, hemp has left the station in Washington, D.C., and it's a big issue on Capitol Hill. And together, we are pushing hearings that we actually have never had before. We passed the hemp, the farm bill, and we re-legalized the hemp farming production in this country without ever having a committee hearing specifically on hemp, and so we have Congress getting up to speed as well. Any questions on the federal update before I move on to the state?
Yeah, Patrick, Tom Pierce. Okay, we're here setting procedures for testing, regulations in this state, and other states are doing the same. Destruction methods if the crop goes hot. Is the federal government doing the same thing, and are they going to trump what we're doing here in the state level?
No. The federal government's role and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's role is to provide guidance. So I think what we're going to get is guidance on these issues, and not necessarily a hammer and a mandate that you have to do this. I mean, the provisions were designed to allow for states to make these types of decisions. That said, they're going to, we want to get away from a patchwork quilt mentality of both enforcement and implementation. And so I think what we're going to get, even though the states are delegated the authority to develop their own plans and administer this program as is fit for their state and the way they operate, there are going to be certain benchmarks and standards that the federal government is going to be looking for the states to apply. Does that answer your question?
So the feds are not going to dictate how the testing protocol or procedure,
they're not going to dictate, but I think they're going to give some guidance on how they're interpreting, in particular, this language of post-decarboxylation or similarly reliable methods. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, as far as state legislation goes, there's two important pieces of legislation moving through the legislature as it begins to get into the final stages, actually, as it works through the final stages of the legislative session. Initially, SB 153 is working to amend the Food and Ag Code, amending the hemp cultivation provisions, and really conforming our ag code to the 2018 Farm Bill and the minimum requirements required under that for state plans that we reviewed when we were here last in February or March. But it's largely technical amendments. The industry, the California Hemp Council, Vote Hemp, and other stakeholders have been working closely with the department to continue to refine the code to make this program as efficient and workable as possible, together with consulting with such organizations as the rural counties and the Farm Bureau and other folks. And importantly, on this note, I would say that the main requirements under the minimum standards are really tracking and reporting hemp production and registration status to the USDA. There will be some further amendments to the statute or the legislation, including a registration component for research, and those details are still getting worked out. But the important point to note here is that even if production is occurring under the auspices of research, that it has to be tracked, and that that the USDA needs to know what's going on, where it's happening, and we've been coordinating with the UC, the CSU, and other institutions of higher education, stakeholders, to make sure that we find and implement a workable program on that side. I would note that the seed breeding program does leave some openings for what have been established agricultural research institutions, that the current definition of that will be sunsetting sometime next year. And I believe it's when our state plan is approved by the USDA. And it's because there is a lack of requirement in our statute for registration and tracking the status of that research. The status on the legislation is that it has passed all committees and off the Senate floor without a single vote against. And just a final note on that is that a number of provisions in the statute are dealing with enforcement and compliance with the minimum requirements there, and really working to strike a balance between having a little bit of a hammer on violations, but not making it a criminal matter. Let's remind ourselves that we're dealing with a non-narcotic here, and violations. When you charge a crime, you're dealing with criminal intent, and there's really, in virtually all cases, there will be no criminal intent when violations occur, and if there is, then law enforcement will have the ability to deal with that. Finally, a piece of legislation that's become a little bit controversial is AB 228. And that bill is going in and amending our health and safety code. And what it is doing is it's declaring that industrial hemp products and their extracts, derivatives, and so forth are not an adulterant. And that is significant in the CBD world. It has been asserted by the FDA and by extension the CDPH that hemp CBD is an adulterant, and this piece of legislation declares it not to be an adulterant and significantly provides authority and regulatory authority to the CDPH and regulating under the Sherman Act the processing of hemp and requiring that processors register as food manufacturing facilities. So we're working to give the government appropriately regulatory authority over the production of these products to ensure consumer safety. That's what this is all about. It's about consumer safety. There will be some amendments to the legislation that will likely include the requirement of a QR codes consistent with other states like Indiana and Florida that require a QR code on the product such that consumers can feel safe that this is from hemp. They can go to the website on that QR code with the COA showing that it that points to that it was produced lawfully and that it complies with the less than 0.3% THC standard. And it also will, I think it, John, correct me if I'm wrong, if there is potentially going to be a CBD amount requirement on that QR, on the COA, or is it just THC?
I think it's going to mirror what's in like Texas and Florida and Indiana, which I think it requires just, I think it's THC, and I believe maybe like heavy metals or other things, but I don't recall CBD, but maybe that's in the language, and
Let's just say CBD content may be included in that.
Yeah, and I know you weren't on a recent call about some of the updates, but there's been a kind of horse trading back and forth and trying to figure out, you know, how to get enough support to get the bill through and the cannabis industry, et cetera. So.
Oh yeah, we're going to get there. So to that note, we anticipate that we are going to be bifurcating this legislation. We are going to be, because of what John just alluded to, we really tried to get a lot done this year through AB 228. One of the things, this is really principally for addressing CBD products on normal retail shelves. But there's also the issue of getting industrial hemp products into cannabis dispensaries. And that raises a whole slew of issues around testing and just what are the requirements there. And it's created a backlash in the cannabis industry. And while as part of our coalition, we have considerable involvement from the cannabis side, but there is a large sector of the cannabis community that takes issue with the fact that that industrial hemp will be treated differently within the BCC system. And while we're arguing that the Sherman Act protects the consumers and equally, if not better, than the BCC requirements, testing requirements, protects the consumers, you know, there's still some work to do on educating the cannabis community, as well as working in concert with the BCC and the administration on just how to do it effectively. So what we plan to do is bifurcate the legislation, put the Business and Professions Code section within a new bill, make it a 2-year bill, and come back next year and roll up our sleeves and continue to work on addressing that issue. But by doing that, we remove a lot of the controversy, the consternation that exists within the administration and the agencies, and we're solely focused on the issue of hemp products being regulated by the CDPH and consumer protection, and getting rid of this, what I would call an absurd position that industrial hemp is an adulterant. That's ridiculous. There's no evidence of it. You know, CDPH has indicated its concern over safety. The World Health Organization has reported on its safety. You know, open up the books, read the studies, pay attention to the information we've been providing. Don't stick your head in the sand. and really get on board with the rest of this country and the global movement towards accepting hemp as having therapeutic value, and that CBD is, for the most part, relatively, in terms of, as far as side effects and relative to pharmaceutical drugs, innocuous. And there may be some upper levels of limits on what we should be allowing folks to have, but it's certainly not on the order of declaring it to be an adulterant. They're doing no service to the citizens of the state of California by doing so. They're parroting the FDA, and FDA's position has been indicated to be the wrong position, so stated by Congress, and they now have the tax and they've got the mandate to allow for these products on our shelves, albeit safe products and ones that are serving our community in a good way and not putting bad products on the shelves. So we want that. So let's work together with them and make it happen. And with that, that's my report.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. You're very passionate about this. Quick question. In regards,
As we all should be.
Yes. In regards to AB 228, is there anything in there? It seems like most of that legislation is after the product has left the farm, so involved more in processing and selling of products. Is there anything in AB 228 and even in SB 153 that would be affecting the farmers?
Oh, SB 153 is all about the farmers. Okay. SB 153 is the Food and Ag Code amendments, and it's all about hemp production and the farmer's role in that. But a lot of it has to do with the state's role in being the liaison, if you will, between the farmers and the USDA.
All right. Anyone else on the board have a question for Patrick?
I just wanted to talk about the 228 and the impact of the current environment. I'm not quite sure if people are aware, but many of the retailers in California have been visited by the state of California Department of Health, removing products from the shelf. There's been some reports saying that they're going to take their business license away. They're going to shut the store down. And also, we experienced that at Nativa. We had a visit from them in March, unannounced. They were there for 4 hours. They had backup, and they were upset at us for selling hemp seed oil, hemp seed protein, and saying that we were violating like packaging rules by calling something hemp seed oil. This is not a CBD product, so it was. This is the kind of thing, and there was even discussion that they were going to confiscate our products, legal products that are legal in trade. So this is the kind of environment that the state of California is that businesses in the state of California are having to operate in. Which is unfortunate. This is a growing industry. We've been a leader in clean energy and wind and technology, and here is another up and coming industry, hemp, and obviously many of us here want to see this move forward. But this is really important for this to get resolved, because it's hard to do business when you get knocks on the door about doing business and you think you're doing everything the right way, according on the federal level, but it's different on the state level.
Yeah, and what John's speaking to really is labeling, and I think they were bringing up an issue like you weren't labeling it properly or what have you. But that's what we're working to do. We're working to get this ironed out. We're working to get the labeling issues ironed out. And I agree with you. Look, California, what is it? The 5th largest economy in the world. We owe it to the rest of the world, the country, and the state to be leaders. And that's what we're working to do. We're working to be leaders, and if the government's not going to do it, then the people will, and we'll carry the government along with us. We've been doing it since 2005, and we'll continue to do it.
All right, anyone else on the board have a question?
Yeah, I actually have quite a few questions regarding proposed legislation here. So
Okay.
good to see you again, Patrick.
You, Matt.
On AB 228, is there anything in there that would affect how industrial hemp-derived CBD products are sold through the MRSA system? Or is this mainly for, products that are just going to go on grocery store or retail
Yeah,
shelves?
so what I was speaking to, so Macursa, right, the cannabis, we had a provision, there is currently a provision in there authorizing licensees to sell industrial hemp products, but that's created a lot of controversy, so we're bifurcating that out, and we'll be dealing with that next year.
Okay, and then it seems that that issue is somewhat addressed in SB 153 too, 153 as well, where, any any industrial hemp product cultivated under that system will be, considered and regulated as much. Is that correct? Like 81006C, industrial hemp shall not be cultivated on a cannabis license. If so, it's
Oh, no,
considered
what's that saying is that a cannabis licensee cannot cultivate in the same premises that cannabis is being cultivated in. And premises is defined under the Business and Professions Code as essentially an area within a parcel. So you could feasibly, as long as it's not within that demarcated premises on the real property parcel, you could have dual production on that parcel.
Okay. And then that wouldn't technically go through the BCC regulations?
Nope.
Okay. And then regarding the state plan, when do you think, from your perspective, those will be reviewed and approved by USDA?
Well, that's contingent upon USDA coming out with its regulations. So we anticipate, hopefully we're going to get regulations by the end of the year. The way the 153 is drafted, I got to check this, but I believe we're at a May 1.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because
Yeah.
it was changed from Jan 31st to May 1.
Yeah, that was done in concert with the Department of Justice and the Department of Food and Ag, such that there would be reasonable time to get that state plan together without forcing the hand of time and giving them a reasonable amount of time to get it in, as opposed to feel like there's just not enough time and rushed. And we want to do this right. We don't want to rush a process. So the thought is that we've got a registration program in place until a state plan is approved, which is great. Thank God we've got that going now. And that as long as that state plan is approved before the sunsetting of established agricultural research institutes, and actually that doesn't sunset until the state plan is approved. What it needs to proceed and get done before is the sunsetting of the 2014 Farm Bill provision. So we believe that I think it's, yeah, well, so that sunsets 1 year, I believe, from the issuance of the regulations. So let's say the regulations, USDA regulations, are issued in November, then we're fine. And the earliest was going to be August. So the USDA has 30 days to approve or deny the state plan. So it's either 30 or 60 days, but that gives us plenty of time to have our state plan in place before 2014 sunsets.
Okay, and then kind of regarding one of the issues you brought up with the EARIs, the Established Ag Research Institutes. Yeah. So it seems like that kind of, I guess, the non-Institute of Higher Education exemption there is going away with this, but then there'd be potential for some of these private or public organizations to register as a seed breeder, and then they could do their varietal work under that, and then I guess ask the secretary for a lenience on testing if it's part of their varietal plan.
That's correct, and I want to speak to that for a second, because it's created a little bit of an uproar in certain circles. But the bottom line is that even under the 2014 Farm Bill, established agricultural research institutes that aren't institutions of higher education are not covered and protected. So whatever's produced needs to be remain in the state until you are either registering or as part of an institution of higher education. So we think that's a significant importance because most of these items are going to find themselves into interstate commerce and subjecting folks to potential criminal prosecution or, practicing the art of cannabis distribution. So we got to be careful, and we're here, working, in the interest of all folks, trying to protect the industry and not hurt it.
The last thing I had too was it seems like the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board is going to be extended to 13 members, and I would just ask that there be a representative from the tribal nations included.
Duly noted, and could you just follow up with me on that offline, and we'll look into that.
All right, thank you, Matt. Anyone else on the board have any questions for Patrick regarding upcoming legislation?
One of Matt's questions covered mine.
You don't have another one?
No.
Okay.
Well, actually, maybe one more. Who's going to administer this pilot program? Is it the CDFA or? Is it the UC
it's my opinion that we have a pilot program already, and it's being administered by the CDFA. Yeah. The program that's in place is a pilot program.
That's my opinion too.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Joshua. All right, anyone else on the board have a question for Patrick? No, don't leave yet. Okay. All right, nobody on the board, then we leave it open to members of the public. Would anyone as a member of the public like to comment? And I would want to remind everyone that members of the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board nor employees of the California Department of Food and Agriculture actually make the laws. So we're not the ones to complain if you're not happy with the law. That would have to be to your state legislatures. All right, thank you. I think we have Wayne would like to talk.
Hi, Wayne Richmond, California Hemp Foundation, Executive Director and Executive Director of California Hemp Association. Great that you're all here today. It's nice to be back here getting the state's business done on behalf of farmers. There's been an awful lot that has transpired since y'all last met. We all last met last December, not the least of which USDA was out here after the Farm Bill passed and did some tours. Michelle was on one of the tours that came and saw one of our seed-producing facilities in Ventura. And we were very proud to host them, and everybody seemed to be pretty excited. I'm standing here today because I am concerned about the legislation as our members, and they've asked me to express that concern. First off, I should say is SB 153, we do support most of the provisions. Where we're most concerned is, despite what Patrick had just said, there is absolutely no official pilot program in this state, and that is hurting our farmers. Our farmers are buying seed from various places, and they are not getting what they intended when they purchased it based on the COAs that they're receiving. So we are finding a preponderance of male plants, lower propagation rates, and we suspect that the analyses will not match up well. So this is a big concern. And as folks here know, the last November 30th, just prior to the December 12th meeting, the last meeting of this group, UC Davis hosted the first ever California Hemp Summit. And that was very significant because we were moving forward, we all thought, in the state, towards a pilot program of some sort. I am dismayed to say that that blew up in May, a week before it was to be announced at UC Riverside. And the reasons for that are real simple. Federal funding to the institutions of higher ed, nothing else. It's because THC is still on Schedule 1, and they don't want to risk their federal funding. So what does that leave our farmers at? Leaves them to their own device, or to use the wonderful provision that Patrick and his crew managed to get into the original bill that we're all operating on from California state law back in 13 or 14? And that's the Established Agricultural Research Institutions. They provide and have provided an immense resource in the last year and a half to the farmers in this state to give them the comfort and the wiggle room with regard to seed and testing and learning how to grow this crop. And as members of the tour of the USDA know, they received a full 70-page report, one of our reports specifically on the ranch that they were visiting at the time, which was the McGrath Ranch down in Ventura. So I'm a little concerned when we're working towards what is purported to be comporting with the USDA or FDA or DEA with regard to our one really beautiful exemption that we've had that has enabled our farmers. So with the removal of that in SB 153, there's really nothing replacing it. And having conversation about, well, there might be some rule and administrative things to pass the testing, you know, that's a song that I'm not hearing the music very well on, and neither are our farmers. So we stand here, and I stand here in opposition to Senate Bill 153 for really just the one part. We support the change and the reaffirmation that THC is just THC delta 9s and not THCA. So our disagreement with it, despite what others may want to characterize it, are really just that. So what I'd like to do is we have already submitted this letter into the legislature. I'd like to have it added into the record. I'd also like to point out a nice picture of the USDA deputy administrator standing next to our sign at our farm. So everybody has done everything above board.
All right, about 15 seconds, Wayne.
So I'm just going to pass those out. I've got copies for everyone here, and you can have that. The other thing I'd like to bring up just briefly is I have an additional letter, too, that's in the stack, if you guys could take one of each. This is from the research associate who was attached to the UC Davis aborted now Hemp Consortium. Fully in support of what we're doing, and he is actually now part of our team. So we've hired in some agronomists, we have postdocs, we have people from various universities working with us. So we're very disconcerted about that. The supposition that the USDA requires it or federal law requires it, actually, for those of you who may not be aware, yesterday the Department of Justice and the DEA issued an item kind of explaining where they're going with testing, okay? They got sued. And so the federal authorities decided to push on the Department of Justice to get through with their cannabis testing program. And lo and behold, they've got 33 applicants, of which only 2 applicants happen to be institutions of higher ed. All the rest of them are private institutions doing research. So I just leave that hang out there because that is not a requirement of the federal law in any way, shape, or form. And it would hurt California farmers not having the established agricultural research exemption as long as we can, doing the good work of seed trials and other breeding and other investigative and research opportunities. So I just leave that out there. Thank you for giving me the extra time to explain this. There's a lot of pieces that have been moving since we last met here. So again, thank you for your consideration. It's now in the record, and I leave it at that.
All right. Thank you, Wayne. All right, next up, please state your name.
George Bianchini with SG Farms. Regarding the AB 228, one of the concerns I had is if the group had taken in consideration the 0.3% on the THC and how that grows with volume. I spoke before on this, and I wanted to bring it up again. So those of us that do grow and then make a pure CBD isolate, we end up with THC. So right now, the BCC says that we cannot sell it in the only legal responsible way to sell it, which leaves us no other way to deal with it. So Again, I'm coming here because we need a legal way and process of how we deal with the byproducts of that product. Now, with the with the federal law, it actually states that that THC that derives from a tested hemp product at the 0.3 through after decarboxylation is considered legal. So I don't know whether they just, like California, has nobody that understands cannabis that are writing the rules. But there's a serious problem there because based on the federal law, I can go open a CBD store, call my THC industrial hemp, and compete with the dispensary. And so we need clarification on that. And of course, that's not going to be how this thing ends up. But depending upon how you want to look at how the statutory law is written, that does seem to be the case. So we need a clear path of specifically THC. I'd like to see all the product be able to be sold at the dispensary level, even though as myself that has 2 cannabis licenses, we're giving them up. That whole BCC thing is a complete failure. Most everybody is going out of business, and we're going to stick with just CBD products. So even if we're allowed to sell the CBD into dispensaries with the limited amount and way that they're running things, it's crashing and burning as we speak now anyway. The other concern is in SB 1409 that deals on that same topic, that maybe AB 228 deals with, is the 0.3% of THC is for all products, and it says resin too. Well, I don't know anybody that's ever made a resin that's 0.3%. It normally goes up in about 10 times. So normally the first run of a raw oil product is going to be about 3%. And so I believe that should be modified to read that all products for sale should be at that 0.3 level. There are times in processing that things go up and above. And it should we start with a legal product that's tested, we get our paperwork, and then when it's sold, it should also comply with that factor. But there are times in between that things can grow, and that puts, if an inspector comes in at that particular time, we're looking at a Schedule 1 penalty because of timing. So I think that should also be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I had a just quick question. Can you reference where that said residue or that last part, what language?
Okay, that was SB 1409, Section 8, 11018.5. And it lists out the 0.3 percentage of THC, and then it goes and lists all the different things, all the derivatives,
Right.
the resins, the products. And I believe that they've made a mistake on the way they've done their wording.
All right, thank you.
All right, anyone else? Please state your name.
Paul Castillo, Ramon Law Group. Just a couple quick comments on SB 153. Just some requests for the board here. When a state plan is put in place, if and when SB 153 goes through, respectfully request that a board meeting is held so that the public can have the opportunity to comment on it, at least through this particular avenue. Second, with respect to the defining of THC as Delta 9, if and when this legislation goes through, if the board could issue some sort of advisory opinion, similar to what it's done in the past, informing local officials, whoever it may be, that testing protocols should be revised in order to reflect that Delta 9 is now the only cannabinoid we're looking for and not total THC content. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, anyone else in the audience? Justin.
Hi, my name is Justin Neve. I'm with a company named 7 Generations Producers. We're an organic farm in Sutter County. We recently acquired our hemp permit, and we'll start cultivating hemp here in the near term. Just a couple issues here. For 153 and for the feds about standardizing testing, it seems like a lot of the conversation is just based on CBD, which, you know, there's much more, as John stated, that goes to the hemp plant. In Nevada, they did standardized cannabis testing. So I would say if, you know, they're looking at standardization, you know, Nevada's figured it out, probably be some type of national standard as they made a state standard, and then the labs can purchase standards from a regulated manufacturer that creates a consistent standard for testing methodology. For 228, again, to the CBD, my question would be to Patrick or anybody else involved, is that, as John was stating, they've blanketed all the other hemp products that are in there as well. The concern from the farmer is to be able to sell that product. You know, there's already strict labeling laws and food and agriculture codes that make us do certain things for food processing. So we're not quite sure if that legislation clearly defines the fact that our current licenses that we operate under will allow us to continue doing that as such, or if this is going to create another layer of additional work that we're going to need to do and additional licenses that we're going to need to obtain to be able to sell these products. It seems like it comes down to labeling laws, which are very closely regulated by all agencies, and it seems like slightly unnecessary. If the hyper-focus is CBD, from my understanding, there is over 100 different cannabinoids. That would be one of 100 plus cannabinoids. If this is a CBD piece of legislation, then that's one thing. I believe that the FDA has clearly stated that if you're claiming CBD that's officially a medical compound or some type of chemical, if you're labeling it as hemp or hemp extract, that should fall under the labeling law. So the big concern there for the farmer with pre-existing agriculture licenses for selling products in the food and ag is that's already regulated, and we're not quite sure the need for additional layers from the CDPH to then be able to sell the same products. If it's a labeling law that has to do with CBD, then we believe that that'd fall under FDA guideline, but the other laws are in place for labeling.
I could quickly just add, it's addressing hemp processing for a food product or as a dietary supplement. It's not requiring any additional layers of permitting, registration, or so forth to actually process the hemp on the field and drying the hemp and harvesting after harvest and so forth. It's the processing as a food or dietary supplement, whereby it's not going to be you that's going to need to register as a food manufacturing facility. It's whoever is taking what they have purchased from you to be put into a food and processing it as such. There's a whole host of regulations under the Sherman Act and the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that are put in place once a product is being created to protect the consumer. But it's not intended to require any additional layers of bureaucracy for farmers.
Yeah, there is a lot of producer-processors, one and the same. You know, we can have both licenses.
Oh, well, okay, so if you're going to be processing hemp into a food or as a dietary supplement, then you will need to get registered as a food manufacturing facility.
In addition to our
That's correct, because otherwise you would not be covered other than anything other than the Food and Ag Code that just deals with production, hemp production, not the processing into products for the public.
Yeah, Patrick, one more quick question for you. If somebody did want to affect the legislation, they weren't happy with it and wanted to get it changed, what would be your recommendation for the best route to do that?
They could either reach out to the sponsor, Senator Wilk, on the SB 153, and then as far as AB 228, they would reach out to Aggie R. Curry's office. They could also reach out to me or the Politico group, which is we're both guiding, founding members of the California Hemp Council, and I've you know, everybody who's spoken here has an open invitation to reach out to us to work towards reasonable solutions. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. All right, anyone else in the audience wish to comment on current legislation? All righty, nope. All right, before we go to our next item, maybe we'll take a quick, and I say quick, I really mean quick, a 5-minute break, just to use the restroom or something like that. We'll reconvene at 10:50, okay, sharp.
chance. I think we've learned enough to pull it back up. Full term, yeah. We're kind of got everything that the Oregon CBD. We got some lifter, sour space candy, just kind of everything that they got. Everybody laughs at the names of them because they're just these crazy names. But we're struggling, man. The heat's kicking our butt. Yeah.
All right, everyone, we're going to be starting again. Please sit down.
Yeah, no, Steve's a good friend of mine. Went to school with Steve. Yeah.
All right, everybody here, Richard's here.
Yeah.
All right, settle down. We'll take off again. All right, the next item on the agenda is going to be industrial hemp and pesticide requirements, and we'll have a discussion led by Rachel Hubayak of the California Department of Pesticide Regulations. Rachel, are you here?
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. I'm Rachel Kubiak. I am the current cannabis program supervisor at the Department of Pesticide Regulation. I've given a lot of talks in the last couple of years, so it's very possible that I've either presented with some of you or spoken to some of you on the cannabis side of things. Today, of course, we're talking about industrial hemp. Our program, well, we'll talk about this when I get into it, but I'm expecting that we're at some point just going to reclassify this as the cannabis and hemp program at DPR because I'm it for everything that's come up with cannabis or hemp. So anyway, without further ado, I know we're it's already at 11, so I will keep my presentation as short as possible and leave time for any questions that you all have. Oh, okay. So I put up here, and my apologies if it isn't that easy to read, especially in the back. I unfortunately need bifocals, so my long distance glasses don't appear to be working, and I forgot my short ones, so bear with me. But the four main things that I wanted to cover today are things that I just assume potentially would be of interest to this group, so hopefully it hits on those things. First is, how does DPR regulate pesticides on industrial hemp? Second being, which pesticides can I apply to industrial hemp? Does DPR have a website or guidance? And who should I call if I have questions? And just as a note, I try when I'm talking to talk about this as industrial hemp because of the fact that federally and in the state it's defined that way. But if I go back and forth between hemp and industrial hemp, I'm talking about as it's defined as industrial hemp. So how does DPR regulate pesticides on industrial hemp? The basic answer is we regulate industrial hemp just like we do. Oops. What happened there? There we go. We regulate pesticides on industrial hemp like we do any other agricultural crop. So as defined, an agricultural crop for purposes of pesticide regulation is very broad. Industrial hemp is just another agricultural crop in our eyes. That's partially a loaded, it's a little bit of a loaded statement to say that I think that's the direction we want to get this going in terms of it's just like any other crop. But I think everyone in the room understands that this isn't a normal crop in the way that we would have other types of agricultural crops introduced into the state. So for example, if someone decided to grow, bananas or something that historically we haven't seen in the state, it's different in that the government classified cannabis, which includes the plant for industrial hemp, as a drug. So we're dealing with something that was categorized as a drug, and now we're having to regulate it. So it is a little bit different than we would normally see, but it is still under, for purposes of pesticide regulation, just like anything else. So for those who aren't as familiar, DPR, Department of Pesticide Regulation, does not physically send people out into the field to do pesticide use enforcement, for the most part. There's some exceptions, but most pesticide use enforcement is handled at the local county level. So, for example, Rick, he's County Ag Commissioner. So we have 58 counties in the state, and the county ag commissioners are responsible for enforcing the pesticide laws and regulations. So that will go for, it's for hemp as well. Again, it's just another commodity. If you're applying pesticides to industrial hemp, you will need an operator identification number from the county ag commissioner's office because you are required to report your use. There's a few exceptions for that. For example, when we're talking about things that we call the 25B products, there's a certain classification of pesticides, and they are still pesticides, but they are determined by the US EPA to be of such low risk that they don't require registration. So if they don't have to go through the registration process, then this doesn't apply. I hesitate to put if you're applying registered pesticides, because I don't want folks to assume that just because they're applying something that doesn't appear to be registered, that it's legal. And if you're unsure if this is new to you, if you're applying pesticide products and you haven't really done that before, or you've done it in a way that it wasn't regulated, I would strongly encourage anyone who farms to get to know their county agricultural commissioner. Because in essence, that's what you are as growers. You're now farmers in the state of California, just like any other farmer is here, and with that comes all of the roles and responsibilities of that. So get to know your county ag commissioner, but you do have to get an operator ID from them. You need to report your use every month, and your workers need to be trained. All of those things that come into play for traditional agriculture will come into play for you. So that is just sort of a general overall summary of how we regulate pesticides and the things that are going to apply to you for industrial hemp. And if you have any questions, please feel free to jump on in.
Can you give us some examples of these 25B products?
So and when I say we, I mean the Department of Pesticide Regulation doesn't, because we don't register them, we don't keep a list of them, but there are things that contain things like garlic oil or peppermint oil or what's the one I always used to see? I used to be the 25B contact person at DPR many, many years ago. The one that's hot pepper oil, there's a name for it. Yeah, capsaicin. So things like that. There's a very short list of.
Organocide, that would be one, has no EPA registration number.
So that's a product, right? You're referencing a product, yeah. I don't have a list of specific products, but normally the way that you can tell whether something's registered or it's not, it will have an EPA registration number on the container itself. If it doesn't have that on there, it means either of a couple things. One is it's not a pesticide because it's a fertilizer or a nutrient product. Number two, it's exempt from registration, or number three, it's just being sold illegally. And it's an important point to make because the majority of the products that we're seeing in the hydroponic stores, and this was true 10 years ago when I worked in the registration branch at DPR, there's a lot of products that are being sold in those marketplaces that are being sold as nutrient type products. And the reality is that they're actually plant growth regulators, and those products require registration as pesticides. So there are a lot of products out there that you may buy and believe that they don't require registration, but in fact they're being sold illegally. So we have folks right now that are doing enforcement or inspections at marketplaces that cater to this market to ensure that the products they're selling do in fact meet the requirements for registration if they need to. And they're hard to define. I can tell you from working on those things. It depends on what the ingredient is in it. It depends on how it's labeled. There's kind of a fine line and it's not easy to define. The US EPA recently put out actually a draft on these kinds of products moving towards more defined guidance on them. I forget what the title is, but it's something with biostimulants. And so they're taking another look at trying to get this more defined for everyone, including the states, because as a state enforcement agency, it's difficult to be able to have inspectors go into the field and figure out what is this thing. So, yeah. In terms of which pesticides can I apply to industrial hemp, this is probably the most commonly asked question that we as regulators and the county ag commissioners get. There are registered products in California on industrial hemp. There has been products registered for industrial hemp for decades. We have products that go back to the early 80s. The first of those I don't think are actually registered anymore, but the furthest I could go back, I think I found one at least back to 82. I'm not sure why they were registered. They had to be federally registered, so the US EPA had to approve those products back in the day. There was about 9 products registered when I came back to DPR 2 years ago to oversee this program. Currently, if you query the database, there are 19 products registered. At least one of those products I know, I think is for, like, it's either for commodity fumigation or structural around it. It's not specific to the plant itself, so you need to read the label. But there are products registered for industrial hemp. And there is a way to look those up. So that's the secondary question is, well, how do I find the list? Traditionally, if you want to figure out which product you can use on a specific crop, you can go into the Department of Pesticide Regulations database, and you can look up what we call the site code for that commodity. You can put it into the database, and it will pull all of the products, active, inactive, whatever you're looking for, probably active. But you can pull those up, and that's true of any commodity, so peaches, nectarines, grapes, whatever it happens to be. Hemp is one of those. So that's the process that you would go to figure that out. You can use the 25B products because, again, they don't require registration. Some of the time, the labeling on those, because they don't require anything or very little, they don't have a lot of directions for use on them. But you can use those products. The last thing that was on the last slide, it happened to be about, is there anything else that can be used? And this is a topic that came up a lot with cannabis. And the reason being is that historically and normally in agriculture, this is the process you go through to use a product. The product manufacturer decides what they want to market to. They label their product for specific markets. They sell the product. Advisors know which products are used on what, so on and so forth. And if they need to, they can go into our database and look for it. Because of the federal-state conflict with cannabis, the US EPA won't allow cannabis to be on the labels of any products. So they can't go through the registration products to get that added to cannabis. There is, and it's not something that is historically or traditionally used for the most part in agriculture, but the violation associated with using a product that it isn't labeled for is called a use in conflict with the label. And there are products out there that have very vague labeling that use of that product isn't technically considered a violation. And it's not specific to cannabis, so it wouldn't be, it applies to industrial hemp, it applies to grapes, it applies to nectarines, it applies to everything. So there are products that may not be specifically labeled for industrial hemp that you could use. The concern or the issue that's with that is that we can't come up with a system to say this is what you would need to look for to determine that. Because you have to be able to read the label in its entirety, you have to be able to look for specific things and understand labeling. So the best advice I could give is, number one, if you're looking for a product, go to the database to figure out what's already registered, or use a 25B product. If you have questions about products outside of that you might be able to use, again, get to know your county ag commissioner. Talk to them about it. They would be the ones enforcing that in the field. And they have the expertise and the people on staff to answer those questions. If they're uncomfortable with that and they want to kick it up to DPR, that's when we would get involved with that. But I just wanted to point that out because it's come up a lot and we get a lot of questions about, well, this is what your guidance is for cannabis, so is this true for hemp? Which leads me into the next slide, which is, do we have guidance online for industrial hemp? We don't currently, so if you go to our website, and I think the way that they programmed it, if you put in hemp, the cannabis page will come up because that's where our focus was over the last 2 years. We're working to try to get something on the website. It may be very generic to begin with, something about just in progress or something like that. Again, unfortunately, we didn't get any additional staff to deal with industrial hemp. So I'm working, trying to get as much as I can get done on this. So I hope to have something coming in the next month. But currently there isn't anything on the website. In terms of guidance documents, we may be putting something out about that too. It's all in discussion right now, but let me see. Yeah, it leads me into my next slide. If you aren't sure who to call or you have questions, two sources. Either you can contact your county agricultural commissioner or you can contact me directly. And I should have put, my apologies, I should have put my contact information on the slide, but I think I have lots of business cards with me. Or I can tell you right now my direct phone number and everybody can write it down. I'm serious, it's 916-445-5010. So again, 916-445-5010. And again, just, be patient. I'm it on the hemp side for right now. And I also oversee the coordination of cannabis activities. The last slide I put up wasn't to be able to view in here, but for those who have a printed copy, and I'm welcome to provide this through Michelle or Lawrence to anybody who's interested in it. It's just a list of the pesticide laws and regulations that primarily cover our authority for pesticides. And because, again, applying pesticides to industrial hemp apply just like they would to anything else, these are the laws and regulations that you would want to become familiar with if you're dealing with pesticides. So there isn't a whole lot that I brought to the table. If you have any questions specifically on anything that I talked about or that I didn't talk about, I'd be happy to try and answer the questions.
Thank you, Rachel. I actually have a question.
Okay.
Have you found any reason that farmers are calling you that they want to use a pesticide on industrial hemp? For example, a certain pest or a certain fungus or bacteria?
Yes and no. I get a lot of emails and calls about all kinds of things. If I could share some of the things that I've gotten emails about, it's the most interesting thing I've worked on in 20 years, I assure you. Usually the things that I have gotten, the request, are usually, it's kind of both a complaint and a request of, I have this particular problem and I can't find products for use on that particular pest. So what am I supposed to do? Totally valid question. Normally we have a system set up where products can be introduced into the marketplace. We have that now with industrial hemp, but because it's so new, there isn't that many products on the market. Unfortunately, that's outside of DPR's control. We cannot register products in this state until the US EPA has given their approval. And right now, the US EPA right now they just actually put some guidance out last Friday, I think it was, or it wasn't really guidance, but they're proposing a 30-day comment period on 10 different products that people can weigh in on. I've looked at the proposal. It's in what they call the Federal Register, which is where the federal government notices their actions or things they intend to do. They're all biologics. I think almost all of the products, except maybe for one or two, are azadirachtin products, all of which have an exemption from tolerance. So this idea about pesticide residue that may remain on the agricultural commodity after it's harvested doesn't come into play because they've all received an exemption from it. But that was put out by them for a 30-day comment period last week. I reached out to them. They have some other information that they had provided to me, and my understanding is that it isn't not public information. But it had to do with, are you processing applications for industrial hemp labels, or are you processing amendments? And it felt to me like the answer was, yes, we are looking at them. The additional piece to that wasn't really addressed in there, but I'm sure most of you or some of us are aware of, is that US EPA, which normally sets they have the authority to set residue tolerances for pesticides and pesticides on specific crops. They're still working with USDA and FDA to figure out what this is going to be considered. Like, if you took the worst case scenario and FDA went with, this is solely going to be, like, the CBD is solely going to be a drug, I don't know if there would even be a reason for US EPA to develop tolerance, because it wouldn't be making it to raw ag commodity type situations. I know that they have said that they're working, this is the US EPA, they're working with IR4, and for those unfamiliar with IR4, it's a way for pesticides to get labeled for specific crops that the manufacturer isn't interested in putting on that label. So when the companies develop those their products, right, they're doing it to make a profit. It takes about 10 years to get a new chemical to market. They go through approximately 400,000 different compounds to get it there. It costs about $350 million. So they have a vested interest once that product gets to market to sell it to the commodity where they're going to make money. California is unique because we grow so many specialty crops here. Almost everything is considered a quote-unquote specialty crop because it's not corn or soybean or a couple of other things. So this IR4 program helps develop the data necessary to add that product or that crop to a manufacturer's label so they don't have to necessarily pay out of pocket, but provides the farmer a tool that they're seeking that may not currently be out there. So I've heard this IR4 program is working with US EPA to talk about developing tolerance, but I don't know if it's specific to food and fodder or feed and fodder for like animals, or if it's specific to something else. I don't have that level of detail yet. I'm trying to figure out as much as I can. So as a department, we don't end up playing triage. We're trying to sort of stay on top of it and think forward, but it's difficult. This is probably the most difficult and interesting thing I've ever worked on.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Anyone else on the board have any questions?
We have a question.
Sure.
When I'm looking at labels, I'm looking for those vague areas usually. Like, usually I'm looking at, does it fall under the other part of the, it'll say other related crops, like for grains or herbs.
Mm-hmm.
Are those kind of the two areas where you think it falls under?
Yes and no.
Like vegetables, I don't really.
Yeah.
Falls under there, but.
So that's a really good question. Is it? And we got that a lot on the cannabis side. It's early in the hemp game, so we haven't gotten the questions on this, but the answer is going to be the same. So US EPA, because they set the tolerances, they define basically what a crop group is. And it's set in 40 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 180. Talks about what those crop groups are. As a company, if you want to put a whole crop group on that label, there's all the different types of, say, trees, if that's, whatever it is. They require you to put forward data on like 3 specific of those groups. And if you do that and they approve it, then you can have the whole group on your label. What we've been asked a lot is, because this is an herb, does it fall under herbs and spices, which is a crop group, even though it's not listed? And the answer is no. It doesn't. EPA has to designate it as falling into a crop group or designate it as not being a crop group to fit into something. So if we're looking at whether labeling is broad enough and it says for use on palm fruit include, or such as, or including, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and it doesn't go that far, it still doesn't mean you can add cannabis into that or hemp into that. One of the things we look for, but this isn't just, I mean, keep in mind that I'm not saying if it has this on there, it's absolute, but if it says for use on the following crops, including but not limited to, and then lists one crop or 50 crops, it has opened the door. That's more of the vague language that we're looking for versus within the specific crop groups. Because the specific crop groups are what they are, and they're defined by EPA. Industrial hemp is even, a lot of the questions we've gotten come up for industrial hemp are because very few percentage-wise farmers, as you all know, grow for fiber. Most of it's being grown for CBD oil. And the CBD oil is being infused into these other products. So the question and the concern is, if it's being grown for that, it's no longer a fiber crop. Fiber crops don't require a tolerance. What do we do with that? We're still in the process of assessing that in terms of what does that mean? It's not, we have other crops, cotton's like that, corn can be like that. We've got multiple different, both food and non-food type crops or oils associated with those commodities. But traditionally, all that has been worked out at the federal level. So cotton's an example of that. If you're developing a product label and you have to have a tolerance established for the food part, but not for the non-food part, or maybe you have it for the oil and the food, and there's different tolerances established with that. When the manufacturer develops the labels and the rates and the pre-harvest intervals and the things that are on there, they do so with all of those tolerances in mind. So that normally, if it's a general label, regardless of what happens to it once it leaves the farmer, there isn't going to be an issue of an over-tolerance. None of that has been teased out in this yet because it's so new. So the questions remain. We're trying to think through these things. I can tell you that specific subject is the topic of an association that represents all of the departments of food and agriculture in the state that we're unique at being part of. We're the only state that has a Department of Pesticide regulation. But we're working through that right now. But it's not defined yet. Normally, you will have labels sometimes that will say specifically that it's for production of something, but there's a lot of labels that don't say that. So if you had a label and it said you specifically could only grow it for this commodity, okay, but the farmer doesn't always know what's going to happen to that commodity once it leaves. I mean, it could potentially be turned into a number of different things. So it's a unique, interesting legal type question that we're discussing right now.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Anyone else on the board have a question?
Yeah, hi, Rachel.
Hi.
I have here, it's from your DPR. Yes. It's on cannabis, pesticides that cannot be used. Mm-hmm. It's very helpful. And also I have one on pesticides, insecticides, miticides that can be used.
Yeah.
And that are not labeled for cannabis. And I picked these up from the Monterey Bay Agriculture Commissioner's office. And they seem to be pretty updated. They were done in 2018.
Yeah, so we produce, so the comment is that we have guidance documents. We have a guidance document that spells out, we being DPR online, a document that spells out which things cannot be used on cannabis. We have another guidance document that attempts to explain what would be legal. we need to probably go back and revise that document because it was very difficult to put together in the time we had to put it together, but just because an example of, say, azadirachtin or something is listed on that guidance document, doesn't mean every product's gonna fit both tolerance exempt and broad enough that has azadirachtin in it. So the guidance, that particular document needs probably some updating and revision. If the question is, are we going to produce something like that for hemp? The answer is, I'm not sure. I'm not sure which direction makes sense for us to do. Clearly, there is a need for stakeholders to know how we're looking at industrial hemp. The difference with industrial hemp is that it isn't federally illegal anymore, whereas cannabis is. So the things that were done on behalf of cannabis don't necessarily apply to industrial hemp. And so we're internally discussing those types of things in terms of, you know, normally we don't do commodity-specific type guidance. We have, I think avocado was probably one of them many decades ago because it was new. But do we develop something that singles it out when we really want stakeholders to understand that it's not different? It's just like anything else that we do. So I'm not entirely sure what direction we're going to go to on the guidance documents for industrial hemp, or if it will just have more generic information like we had up today that says it's just like everything else. You got to sort of learn to deal with that system. And the problem with not having enough product on the market is something that farmers in this state have faced for infinity, which is why they created the IR4 program, because they're too small to get the manufacturers in many cases to develop the products that they need or to label them in such a way. It's really expensive. It's really expensive to go to EPA and get a tolerance established for a crop or to market to a crop that is so small that you don't get a return on. So yeah, so I'm not sure what we're going to do on the guidance part yet.
All right.
If you have ideas, though, please, like, you know, email me. If you think we should move in a specific direction, we'd be happy to hear from all of you.
I think any info would be helpful. It's definitely one of the topics that comes up at the county level. And there's probably 20,000 acres of hemp in the state. So if we could get something out by, you know, early spring next year, it'd be really helpful.
Great.
All right, any other questions or comments from the board?
Not a question for Rachel, because she's probably tired of talking to agricultural commissioners about this, but I do have a comment on a question that you asked about pests of concern. And we have a cannabis aphid that's shown up in California. It's been at least 4 counties that I'm aware of when I logged on to CDFA's website. So unfortunately, we're going to have to do a statewide survey to see how widespread that is throughout. It's being found on cannabis as well as industrial hemp. It's currently rated as an A pest, but we need to see how widespread that is so we can determine what needs to be done.
All right, is this an aphid that's specific to cannabis, or does it also affect other crops?
I'm not an expert on this, but I believe it does affect other crops. From what the limited amount that I've read about that. I don't know, Michelle, if you've heard any additional information on this or not.
There's information, I think, listed in the pest rating proposal, but I believe it's very specific to cannabis.
All right, thank you, Rick. All right, anyone else on the board have a question or comment? All right, anyone in the audience have a question or comment for Rachel?
George Bianchini, SG Farms. Thank you, Rachel. Several years ago, I spoke in Arizona. They came out, their agricultural department came out with a whole list of products that were available to use, one of them being microbutanol. And I asked the people there that were growing how many people were going to grow for CBD oil, and every single one of them raised their hand. And I said, if you use products on this list, you won't be able to sell your product. Microbutanol, like perchloroethylene and hydrochloroethylene, will convert to basically mustard gas when it heats up past 400 degrees, which is consumption temperature. There are a lot of these products that are very dangerous. Anyway, my main point is while this is going to be valuable for some products that will work, my recommendations is that if you're going to grow industrial hemp, you don't need to use pesticides. There are other ways of growing that are far superior to pesticides being used. And as far as the aphids, we had one of our farmers had a huge aphid problem. Number one, Safer Soap even diluted one to one, and diluted instantly takes care of them. As well as the number one thing would be ladybugs. People who grow, and I have all of our farmers do this, people who grow industrial hemp, even cannabis, should also be growing their own ladybugs on a regular, annual, repeating basis. They'll take care of all your problems. In San Joaquin, 3 years ago, the agricultural commissioner, because hemp had no approved products, they wouldn't give us a permit to do any spraying, so we decided to turn it into one of our research projects. And what we found was the perimeter that had corn, and the farmer decided not to spray it, so there was no possibility of that spray coming over to the hemp field. What we had was about 2 rows into the hemp had some bug problems, spider mites specifically. The corn had tremendous amounts of it, and what we found is that there are other crops that like the bugs better. So sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out how to do things without having to resort to chemicals. We're dealing with a product that people are going to consume mainly for health purposes, and it doesn't make sense to add poisons into our healthy products. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience have any questions or comments? Wayne?
Anyway, I just wanted to add to the conversation that in Ventura, what we used were beneficial pests. So we had some caterpillars coming into the fields from some of the cabbage nearby, and I just want to let people know that beneficial wasps worked quite well. We have it in our report for anybody who's interested in knowing more about that. Just wanted to share that there are beneficial pests besides pesticides that can be used in this instance.
Thank you very much, Wayne. And Rachel, does your office regulate what Wayne mentioned, beneficial pests?
We don't regulate them. We do have we have a group within the department that is specific to integrated pest management. One of the key people historically that had been there for many, many years was involved before I had come back a couple years ago on the cannabis side, and she has left the department. So it's certainly still an area that if we can help provide information on, alternatives to pesticides, that is I want to say a big piece of our program, but a pretty large piece of our program internally overall is integrated pest management. And it's something I think that the department has pushed for a long time in terms of, there definitely are non-pesticide related tools that you can use to control pests. And it's beneficial to use those in cases where you can, so that we don't have overuse of pesticides, but also recognition that sometimes those things can't be controlled in certain situations. And as to what Rick was talking about too, there's potential consequences now of having, adjacent crops and pest movement between those crops, and creates new issues that have cropped up.
Thank you, Rachel. Anyone else in the audience have any questions or comments regarding pesticides for Rachel? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. All right, let's move on to our next agenda item, industrial hemp and fertilizing materials labeling requirements. And this discussion will be led by Amadou Ba. I hope I said that correctly. Amadou Ba. From the California Department of Agriculture Feed, Fertilizer, and Livestock Drug Regulatory Services Branch.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. My name is Amadou Ba. I'm the chief of the Fertilizing Material Inspection Program under the Feed Program. Based on your invitation, I'm just giving an update on the interaction of our program related to hemp issues. As you know, hemp is an emerging issue. Cannabis was an emerging issue. At that time, we did request a counsel from our legal office how to operate in that new space. And we got a very clear guidance how to operate under, how we operate with cannabis pertaining to fertilizing material. Because being some issues with federal issues, basically being a Schedule I drug, we were not allowed to use any labeling for cannabis. Therefore, that was put off. After the Farm Bill passed again, we consulted with our legal office. We got a very clear guidance that means hemp is allowed in fertilizing material. Therefore, we have a very clear guidance how to operate, how to review fertilizing material, making some specific claim pertaining to hemp. Okay, so as you know, this program basically do not regulate use. We do not regulate growers. We regulate manufacturer of fertilizing material. Everything we do is centered on product labeling. We do not regulate the use component for any commodity. Would that be leafy green? Would that be citrus? Any growers could hire their CCA certified individual to basically advise them how to proceed. Meaning you can do your soil test, your leaf sampling, and all of that. They may advise you what is the best way to proceed. Again, we regulate the manufacturing component of what pertains to fertilizing material, and our program is involved in that space. But that being said, we have some products currently that are making hemp claim, duly registered, compliant with the Food and Ag Code. Therefore, I decided to give you a summary of those product types. For example, one of those categories used for hemp basically make hemp claim and has a hemp name in the product name, and that product is allowed. We have other group of products where basically they mentioned hemp among other crops, not just specific to hemp. But also we have product where hemp seed flour is used as a fertilizing material. So I can proceed just to be more practical, give you some of those examples. For example, we have a company name, in this case, Advanced Nutrient, a company name, and their product name is Hemp Formulation. It has 2723, meaning NPK, 20 nitrogen, 7 phosphate, and 23 potassium. So what we review is a commercial fertilizer. That means all nutrients combined exceed 5%. And the claim is this product is specifically designed for growers of high CDB hemp strain. So we did allow the CBD claim. Originally, this entity, when they applied, they just said high CDB strain, but based on legal requirement, it has to be hemp specific for us to approve that product. Therefore, there is an iterative process back and forth. The hemp designation was allowed on that specific product. We have another product, Monty Hemp Pro Starter. Again, it says it's a very generic claim for hemp production. So those kind of claims, we do accept them as long as they are hemp specific, defined for hemp. Again, making those claims doesn't mean if you have a generic product that have, let's say, NPK, does not mean that product is not suitable for hemp. Again, these people, maybe sometime it is branding, but based on, we are allowed to accept it if somebody does that, but some branding is involved. If your certified crop advisor can advise you for another product to use. Okay, that's basically one example of a label. You see, again, that red hemp formulation, and you see design specifically for hemp grower for high CBD hemp strain. This is an actual label that is approved. We have what we call a product database. CDFA, fertilizer product database. If you go there, enter the word hemp, all hemp-related label will pop up. You will see what are those type of products. And if you have some type of ingredient, you'll be required to provide a certificate of analysis on heavy metal. For example, every product that contain phosphate, because those are mined products. Let's say iron, zinc, manganese will trigger definitely heavy metal analysis. Therefore, you will see what is the heavy metal analysis on those type of products, and it is for you to see. Okay. Again, just another example of a fertilizing material, very generic claim for hemp production, again in the red square box. Again, just an example of those type of products. We have, for example here, example of approved product. These are not specific to hemp. As you can see, it claims for alfalfa, hemp, and lettuce. It is multiple crop use. Again, it has 1408. This product, for example, is not required for heavy metal analysis because it does not contain phosphate. If it does not contain phosphate, zinc, manganese, iron, there won't be any heavy metal analysis required. But mined product, usually when somebody mines, they can hit a vein. It is not uniform, and potentially it might have heavy metal. Therefore, we require a heavy metal analysis on those type of products. So again, those products, as an example, include hemp, but it is not hemp-specific product. Again, just an example of a registered product with CDFA. So last type of product group, those basically are hemp seed flour. Those, just like any type of flour, for example, some people can decide to use canola meal, for example, as a fertilizing material because an analysis is required. And many of those products, let's say Emerald Harvest, it has 0.3, 2 and 3 NPK. So in general, if you use a flour type of seed, the nutrient won't be very high. But again, some products are a blend product. For example, when you see a product having 0.5, 24 and 30, you know it has other ingredients, not just hemp seed flour. Therefore, hemp seed flour can be used. The last product, hemp seed protein powder. So there are different arrays of products. So those are the three different categories we have seen so far being registered. Again, those making hemp claim does not mean you are limited to those type of product. Certified crop advisor might do an analysis again on your soil, on your leaf sample, and see what type of deficiencies is in your crop and can advise you what type of material you might need to use basically to have a better crop. Again, another example, 0.323. Again, we know usually when we see that art, we know what type of product. It used to be type of cannabis, but you cannot make a cannabis claim on those type of product. So, we have our website. It have all our guidelines, fertilizing material registration, I think members of this group mostly are growers, not manufacturers, but if you have an integrated system where you are a grower, but also are involved in manufacturing fertilizer, then you will be required to register with our program. And that, you go to our database. It's an application, and that database is different from the product database because this one, the interaction with the program is very confidential. And nobody else can access your information. You apply for a license, then you submit your label, they be reviewed, and there is an iterative process. At some point, your label will be registered if you are engaged in that space. So this is a licensing and the registration submission. You enter user ID, you enter your password, then you interact with the program staff, then your product is registered and you can distribute it in California. Being registered in California doesn't mean you can't sell your product in Washington, because fertilizers, the majority are not regulated by the Fed. So only interaction with the federal government is when you are making an organic claim. When you make an organic claim, your product is suitable for an organic operation, then we have what we call an organic input material program that review the labeling, and based on USDA NOP standard, your product might be deemed to comply with USDA NOP standard. We review that, and again, if you are making, you think you are making or growing organic, you can register with CDFA. If you are in California, if you are outside of California, there are also entities where you can register your product. Okay? Any question?
Yeah, thank you. Is there any difference in regulations between somebody growing indoors and somebody growing outdoors? For any of the fertilizers that you mentioned?
No, there is no difference between growing indoors and outdoors. There is, we have an array of product. For example, we have what we call commercial fertilizer, which is usually high nitrogen content, and in general, bulk. We have what is a specialty fertilizer. It can be used indoor, it can be used for home and garden. We have what is called an agricultural mineral type of product. Those products in general have low NPK, may have iron, zinc, manganese. All those are in one type of product. So there is 5 types of product, but again, it's based sometime on the packaging and the nutrient content. That's the only difference. But if you have a greenhouse and you want to grow at a commercial scale, there is no limitation on inputs.
All right, thank you. Anyone else on the board have any questions?
Yes. You mentioned certified crop advisors.
Yes.
I'm not a grower, so I don't know the answer. Do the growers have to have a certified crop advisor?
No, you don't. But as you know, there are water board regulation, and if you are part, some people are part of what we call coalition. Let's say you are in the Central Valley, and they are beginning to look at nitrate contamination on, what you apply that amount of fertilizer. Some of it is taken up by the plant, but some of it could leach into below the root zone. And at that time, the water board now is trying to come up with some specific regulation. And they are designing some form where you do your own accounting. How much fertilizer are you applying? What is the nutrient content of that fertilizer? So kind of nutrient budget. Therefore, they have a form where a certified crop advisor have to sign up for that form. But again, that is not under the purview of CDFA, but CDFA, under my shop, we have what is called a fertilizer research and education program. Since the existence of that program, we have funded research and education for about more than 17 million funding basically UC Davis how to address nitrate contamination issues. We have funded some pilot program where we gave grant to train CCAs to be certified in nitrogen management, but also we have given some grant to train some growers in the Central Valley how to address that issue, because we know that issue is coming, and we are trying basically to assist the grower industry how to comply with those potential regulation. I know in the Central Coast, in Salinas Valley, those people are required to report their nitrogen use. Region 3 requires that. So CDFA do not require anybody to have a certified crop advisor, but the water board, based on where you are and how much nutrient you use, high risk, low risk, all of that, those people could be required. But that it impact every grower, not hemp, anybody in that space.
Oh, also, if a grower over fertilizes, does that add to the salinity problem in the soil at all?
Well, that again, I told you I don't regulate growers, but it is an issue that we have been aware. Salinity is a problem because just even of irrigation. People used to flood irrigate. Therefore, it leaches the salt. Now, because of nutrient, people are trying to spoon feed their plant and put less water. And when you put less water, sometime that could lead to salt accumulation. So it's a kind of a balancing act.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a report here. It's 2010, and it's salinity stress across the United States.
Yes.
California is the worst. 2010, it cost the economy $350 million, and that's almost 10 years ago.
Yep. Well, again, at the water board, they have a group called CV Salt. That's basically the issue they are trying to address and trying to basically to mitigate the salt issue. I think nitrate is an important issue, but the salt issue I think is a very imminent issue because salt accumulation is a serious issue, and hopefully a way forward could be found to address those type of issues.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else on the board have a question about fertilizers? No. Does anyone in the audience have any questions that they'd like to ask? Amadou, did I say that right? Amadou, yes.
George Bianchini, SG Farms, and thank you. That was very informative. Questions on the heavy metals, though. You're talking about a lot of the fertilizer metals. I know in cannabis we test now for lead and arsenic and a couple of other ones. So are those the key items that we're really looking for, or the salt-based?
Well, in our CDFA...
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there are a finite, in our end, there are a finite number of heavy metal we are looking at. Again, was industry that looked into it. They felt, any mined product, there is a high risk of arsenic and the lead, and those are one of them. There are also heavy metal, but it is not under our purview currently. So.
And one of the concerns or reasons that I wanted to come up here is that with both this topic and the other topic, it might be good to put on some workshops to share some of this knowledge, whether it be through the advisory group and putting together these workshops to explain this stuff to people. And then also, cannabis itself is an accumulator plant. So by itself, it will pull out heavy metals out of the soil. We're dealing with a bioremediation strain right now, it kind of looks like bamboo, doesn't really create any flower. And that's specifically what it's for. And then that product, along with the certain fertilizers, the heavy metals, the pesticides, the DDT, and other things are incorporated into the stock, and then they can be sequestered into, say, herds that can be turned into a hempcrete. So I think a workshop would be a good idea to work on some of these things and to educate farmers, which they have not been able to. It was not that important before with other products, but hemp seems to have its own little life cycle. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience have any questions or comments?
Hey, Lawrence, just
Oh,
wanted
I'm
to
sorry,
share.
John.
This is more on a federal level, but I remember reading reports that the federal government regulations for fertilizer allows for companies to take hazardous waste and blend it with other nutrients and sell it as chemical fertilizers, and that's been being applied to soils across the United States. It was rather disappointing to read that, so it's a real concern, obviously, if you're growing a crop like hemp, like you mentioned, as a bioaccumulator. So that's one of the benefits when you grow under certified organic conditions. You're not allowed to use many of the fertilizers that you listed here because they're synthetic. And the other thing for climate change, people should just be aware of, one of the leading causes of climate change is the production of synthetic chemical fertilizers. Produces NOx, which is 390 times more powerful than CO2 as a greenhouse gas nutrient. So just we've got to be aware of if we're going to, because hemp, like corn, it likes a lot of fertilizer and nitrogen. So where we get that fertilizer is going to be important for our industry.
All right, thank you, John.
Final comment on enforcement. Every year, basically, we take about 1,400 samples. And early, 10 years ago, we used to see quite a bit of violation on heavy metal. But lately, we have not, that number has decreased significantly because of enforcement issues and added regulation and taking admin civil penalties, and some people were taken to the Attorney General's office. So we have a very active program where we have about 10 investigators spread across the state and are doing a diligent job on enforcement issues.
Thank you. Justin, you had a question or comment?
Justin Eve with 7 Generations Producers. We're an organic farm in Sutter County. Just a quick question. I appreciate all the great information. Is there any additional reporting other than the things that are already in place? If we are an NOP organization, that the reporting and the authorizations that we get from our certifiers to use those products, is there anything additional than the other ones already in place? As you're outlining there, it seemed like there might be some additional things, or is it just the standard reporting for the fertilizers? For hemp, yeah, for the usage of and application of.
Yes, those I just pulled out, those who are making those claims. But because, we have about 12,000 products registered in our system, and all of those, I believe, are used across a wide array of commodities, of crops. These are just, again, I don't want to say it is branding, but it's, it is kind of branding, pulling in, since we are just talking about NPK, NPK is NPK. Therefore, putting the word hemp, it is more knowing there is an emerging field where there is potential to sell product, but again, not regulating use. Many of those commercial products are really suitable for hemp, because I see many products used by citrus grower doesn't say citrus, because they are just, NPK is NPK. So plant root system will pull it up, will incorporate it into the biomass, will produce fruit and all of that. Therefore, the hemp should not limit. Don't just look at the word hemp. There is quite a bit of product that are suitable for hemp, but might not say hemp. Well, I'm not sure what you say standard reporting. What?
If we have to buy a fertilizer.
Yes.
Or anything.
As a grower to us, you are not reporting. The seller, somebody who sells fertilizer, is the one that report to us. We get what is called a tonnage report, how much fertilizer have been sold in all 58 counties. We get that report from the manufacturer, not from the grower. The grower is, you are confusing from my sister agency, DPR. There is a use reporting. CDFA doesn't have a fertilizer use report. A grower doesn't report anything to the Fertilizing Material Inspection Program. There is no report.
Thank you.
All right, does anyone else have a question for Amadou? No? Okay, thank you so much for your report, very helpful. And it's 12 o'clock, why don't we break for lunch? We'll be back here in 1 hour, 1 o'clock sharp.